Thank you, Juliana. So it is really a pleasure to be here as a representative of the ComCam team. Really, I'm presenting today about commissioning, but this is really the work of a huge team back in Tucson and Chile that is really, and other places, that is really putting this, this observatory together. So now I have to figure out how to use this. So I really wanted to start with these amazing pictures, because that's really, in some ways, I could just leave you with this. This is where we are. We're actually going from designs and cartoons to real life and real components. This is just a subset of that, of all what's happening, but you can see we have a facility, we have a telescope, and if you blink a little bit, you can see also the commissioning camera on the telescope at this point. And then on the right, we have a LSST cam completed and ready for verification. And those are, this set of pictures have been put together by Kevin Real, part of the commissioning team. And I think those are really telling the story that I'm going to tell in the next 45 minutes. So this is kind of my outline. I wanted to start with some reminder of our organization changes. And this is just for you to remember who to contact should you have any questions or comments. And then I'm going to go through highlighting some of the ComCam status that really highlighted a lot of integration activity that happened in the last couple of years. And then finally, I'm going to go through the next steps, which are obvious ComCam on Sky and LSST cam on Sky activities. And I just wanted to remind people that I'm actually coming from a more technical side of the astronomy community. So my slide might be mostly like technical heavy, but there are plenty of people here in a room also that can help understand the more scientific side, should you have more questions. All right, so quickly, the organization org chart, you've seen that slide from Jelko yesterday with an emphasis on what's new. And this is the ComCam organization with the three new groups. But I just want to make sure that we emphasize the point that the three new groups are working really together. And the three new groups have been emerged because we are now an integrating system. We are not just subsystems working independently from each other. We have the need to have this ComCam group really be the glue between all the subsystem and the project office and the directorate. So everything, all the priorities, all the resources management are actually including the commissioning, system integration and commissioning teams. So that's why I really wanted to emphasize. And on top of that, you'd see names at the bottom that I wrote again to remind people who to contact should they have questions. So for the system integration, and we have Kevin Real at this point as the observatory scientist. We are looking for a manager. For commissioning, we have Robert Lupton, who's in the room, and Anastasia Alexov. And then for the science verification and validation, we have Keith Bechtel and Austin Roberts. Austin is also in at this conference. So please reach out to them if you have any question related to the different ComCam boxes that we call. And I also added some sort of definition of what those three groups are really bringing to the commissioning activities. So system integration is really bringing the hardware and software together, playing Legos in some ways, really bringing that together to make sure we achieve science images. The commissioning will go beyond and really connect the images to the science that we want to do. And the system verification and validation is really focusing on requirements, both on the system side, but also on the science side. All right, that's enough about that. Now, ComCam status. The items that I chose today are Oxtel and some of the system spread integration. That might be an interesting wording, and you'll understand a little bit more what I'm talking about with the slides. And also I will touch a little bit on EPO integration. So that's another slide that I stole from Kevin Real. I really like this set of slides. You're going to see three. throughout my talk, and it actually shows you the evolutions and the path that we took to go from one sensor to the full LSST cam in terms of integration and bringing all the subsystems together. So you can see on the left picture, the focal plane of the LSST camera with in blue, the science detectors, and in gray on the corner, what we call corner rafts that have wavefront sensing detectors and guided detectors. And so here I'm going to start with this little red square, which is the CCD that we're using in the auxiliary telescope. It's a 4K by 4K science CCD. But let's back up a little bit, and I wanted to make sure that the audience understood a little bit more about the calibration. So we've talked about Oxtel, but what is Oxtel? So if you look at the picture on the top right, you see the main telescope, and you see the dome of the 1.2 meter telescope on the right, and that is what we call the auxiliary telescope. And really, the auxiliary telescope is a component of our calibration hardware that was derived from our science drivers. In a nutshell, we do want to have a photometric repeatability of 5 millimags in JRI filters and 7.5 millimag in UZY filters. And those are driven by some of the science requirements, science cases. And that has some design implication of really controlling the systematic errors. And I'm sure the Gaia consortium understands what it means. We really want to understand transmission variation over the full field of view and other systematic errors. So that's why our calibration hardware has two components: this auxiliary telescope to measure the atmospheric calibration, and Jelko mentioned that yesterday in his talk. Sorry. And we also have a sophisticated in-dome calibration where we have a huge calibration screen. So this is pretty standard to do flat fielding. And we also have what we call a collimated beam projector. And the collimated beam projector is a way, so it only sends a pencil through the telescope, and it's a way, thank you, to really understand the variation across the field of view of your transmission. And if you have more questions about it, I can answer, or Robert can also help with any question about what we call CBP. So going back to the status, the auxiliary telescope, so it's first sliced in July 2019. And since the beginning, we really pushed to build this telescope as a pathfinder for hardware, but also and mostly for software. So as a result, we chose to have the same detectors, the same motors, and therefore the same software, both on the control side, but also on how we reduced the images. We do have a way, so yesterday, if you remember Jelko's talk, the way we do atmospheric calibration is by using a spectrograph. However, we also have a way to only do imaging with the CCD. And so we use a lot this configuration to do a lot of anticipation and practice for the main telescope integration and commissioning. And here I put a little blurb about, again, bringing those three groups that I mentioned at the beginning together to see the common verification, because I really want to, again, emphasize the fact that we're all working together. And so the engineers, the scientists, and the system engineering groups are really working together and looking at the different activities from different views to achieve the results that we want. And on top of that, because it's starting to run twice a month for 3 nights, we use it as a pathfinder also for operation to really understand operation procedures, how to go from the planning to the observing to fixing issues during the day. So it has been a very valuable tool. And quickly also, we have been using our LOV interface. So again, you heard a little bit about it by Jelko yesterday. This is our interface to the control aspect of the whole observatory and also the feedback that we're getting from it. So displays of the status of the telescopes and the software. And we are in a process also to, in addition, get status from the survey and images that you're getting. So if we get, we are working on interface to dig a little bit on the images and the quality of the images in real time. So right now we're actually in the process of taking routine calibration, both on Oxtel and on ComCam actually. And I'm going to go back to the ComCam case later. And we have also put in place some checks to flag issues if need be. And you see an example of that. So I think Robert is going to go into a lot more details this afternoon in his talk. So don't miss it. All right, so I'm going to switch gear and go to the main telescope and talk about the system spread testing, which has also been a very valuable series of integration and tests. So what is it really? So a couple of years ago, we started to receive a lot of components, might be 3, a lot of components on site. So you see on the left picture, our level 3, which is our maintenance level, which has a coding chamber and also a clean room for our camera. And it got filled with M1, M3 cell plus its surrogate, the M2 cell plus its surrogate, and then eventually the integrating structure, which has the rotator and its camera cover wrap, the hexapods, and in black, you can see with a white thing in front of it, you can see ComCam. So we had all this sitting on our level 3. So we first started to do individual testing of each component, functional testing. But eventually COVID started and we thought it would be a great idea to use that as a spread integration test of software. So really understanding the communication between all these elements before it goes on the telescope on the right. So really what we were doing is we were running the telescope with the components not necessarily moving. So we had actual hardware, but we also had simulators, like the mount was actually simulated and we could go through an observing sequence. So we could slew the telescope in different places, make sure that the rotator was actually following and going to the right place, make sure that the mirrors were actually being corrected for gravity as we were slewing in different places. Again, the slewing is in simulation, right? So we're, and then taking images with ComCam while tracking on sky. So the tracking was mostly done by the rotator at this point, and also making sure that the mirrors were following. And at this point, we were also exercising the interface between the camera, the telescope software, and the pipeline, in the sense that we were making sure images were landing in the Butler, had the right metadata. And so we did a lot of preliminary integration testing and verification of our software. We also had the opportunity to simulate out of focus images. So out of focus images are needed for the wavefront sensing parts, for the active optic system part, and I'm going to go back on that later. And we were using these images as if they were coming from the camera. So we were ingesting them through our acquisition system. And then we were running the pipeline to adjust the mirrors accordingly as we were moving. So we were really doing an observing sequence. And we learned a lot about that. We make sure that we debug the software before we had all components on the telescope. And again, this single activity really provided the right data and the right experience for each of the different commissioning components. So again, working together from different point of view, using the same activities for scientists, engineers, and system engineers. And then my last slide on the status is the EPO. The reason why I wanted to highlight it is not only I think the EPO team has done an amazing job and really to offer the data to a wide variety of users, from scientists to educators and citizen science. But that actually required a lot of background work on infrastructure and connection with the pipeline and data storage. So there has been a lot of interaction between our EPO and our data management team to create all the really, really cool tools that they're hopefully that they will be putting online at the end of the year as they're moving to operation. So if I had to give you a summary slide, what's commissioning so far, in addition to the pictures I've shown at the beginning. So we really routinely use Oxtel to do engineering, but also to really start doing science. And we are actually moving towards looking at, maybe that's not the right term, but microservice to really exercise the full potential of the LSST survey. And we also do a lot more calibration with ComCam as well to exercise the infrastructure. So again, we really want to make sure that we have the processes and the infrastructure in place as we're actually getting on Sky. Something I haven't really put here, but Yusra talked about yesterday, we use precursor data, DC2 and HIC to prepare for the ComSky data as well. And then the last bullet is the mission statement for the EPO. And again, emphasizing that we're actually bringing the data to a very wide range of people. So what's next? So some people might have seen this cartoon chart. The reason why I put it here is because you can see that we're going from a already crowded space on the left of the red line, which is somewhat today, to a very, very busy place on the right. And we need to, so that's what we are doing right now. And Jelko mentioned yesterday a workshop next month. So this is really to make sure we understand priorities and identify needs of help if need be. So that's where, you know, some of you with INCAN can really help us. And of course, this is a nice picture of ComCam on the telescope, which is now ready for more integration. All right, so ComCam, oh yeah, and so in order to help us also with defining those priorities and resources, we have our sets of milestones. I won't go into the details, I just want to make sure people have the link. I think most of you have, and these are being updated every month at this point. All right, so back to to Kevin's really nice cartoons. Step 2 will be ComCam. And ComCam is, as you see in red on the left, it's a 3x3, I will call it raft because that's the name. So we call it a raft of 3x3 detectors, so 9 detectors. And you see a nice picture on the right of it. And again, we still have the same data acquisition system, the same control system, and at this point, the same telescope. So we have a lot of algorithm and codes and software shared. With ComCam, we're going to go through a series of very engineering focused activities, both at the level 3, which is already done, and in DOME. And so the in-DOME ones will be some of the calibration, installation and integration. And also the top one is very technical. So I won't necessarily go into the details. For those people who are interested, please read them and ask questions. But the gist of it is really, this is the first time we're going to put M1, M3 on something that is moving. So at different elevation, and M1, M3 cell will for the first time see some acceleration. So there's a lot of tests that has to happen before we actually can even put the glass mirror on the telescope. But eventually on the right, we're going to be ready for the 3-mirror testing. And that's what we're heading towards. The expected state for ComCam on Sky, so for the start of that on Sky engineering, is also to have the DM requirement we call priority 1A done, verified. So then we can actually use that as soon as we're on Sky. And that has been verified again on precursor data sets. We also have routine Oxtel observing runs dialed down, so we can approach nightly observing runs. So we have the resources, naming observing specialists and the people needed to actually do nightly observations. And then all the infrastructure behind it regarding metrics, evaluation, nightly reports, QA analysis, and also some understanding of data release production and error production using the test campaign from Oxtel. So we need to have a good understanding of that. We also have to make sure we understand our calibration process, our on-sky observing strategy, so with or without the scheduler, and then we can actually say that we are ready to test the image quality, throughput, and calibration. And that's where we are. So that's where we're going to be able to, that's when we're going to be able to start this on-sky engineering. And again, so what's relevant here too is that even though we're starting the on-sky engineering, we would have been processing data from the beginning, right? So we already have exercised the data to catalog conversion and also QA. So this is not the first time we're actually going through that. I did leave this slide, which is again technical, but I think some of the people in the audience might appreciate. So the first activities and the main activities with ComCam on Sky is really to go through the alignment procedures, and that's using procedures that we already done and evaded with the auxiliary telescope. And now we do that with the main telescope. The caveat here is that we will have a laser tracker, which will make sure that we are aligned quickly at the beginning of each night. And so that's something that will help us compared to what we're doing with the auxiliary telescope. And then at the end, we're going to, and then the last bullet point is we're going to do a lot of on-sky active optic testing to optimize our image quality. And I know not everyone is familiar with the active optic system, so I wanted to leave that slide here. And I wanted to emphasize the fact that we have two main components of the active optic system. Again, active optic system is really here to make sure that image quality is as good as we can. And so we have what we call an open loop model, which is what we have in most telescopes. So we have actuators that make sure you deform mirrors to compensate for their own aberration, but also the gravity as you're moving the telescope around and the mirrors deform. And we also have, in order to achieve the image quality requirement, we also have this feedback. You remember the graph of the LSST camera on the corner, you have corner rafts, and I mentioned we have wavefront sensors. So those are there to be able to measure the wavefront in real time and correct for any additional distortion in the system. And that's really to reach the image quality that we say we would. So with ComCam, we do not have those corner sensors, but we can achieve the same thing by defocusing the camera in and out of focus and getting donuts for those people that might not have had breakfast. So that's what we're going to do for most of the engineering nights. And then maybe a little bit later, we're going to optimize that open loop model, and we are going to exercise that closed loop component. And then I left this graph here because one way we're actually going to optimize the lookup table is by doing trend analysis, but also by looking at new methods like reinforcement learning approaches, machine learning approaches, which might help us be a lot more efficient in the future. All right, and then the last part of the ComCam activity is to do system optimization, and that's more, in my head, I see it as a ramp down of engineering activities and ramp up of maybe more science-focused activities where we are going to get a lot more input from the community on where to point or what to do to start exercising the sciences that we want. And that hopefully will happen. It depends a little bit on how the engineering activities go. All right, and the last step, step 3 is LSST cam. So here you have the whole focal plane. And as a reminder, the gray ones are the wavefront sensors. And on the right, you have a really nice picture of the camera with the two different detectors. And we have 189 science detectors for LSST-CAM, not counting the corner refs. So looking at a path to operation a little bit similar to ComCam, here is what we're going to do. We're going to first do testing at the level 3, re-verification of the camera, and also testing some interfaces with the pipeline. We're going to do in-dome engineering to make sure that we are ready for on-sky testing. So that's going to be, again, testing some of the detector, but also some interfaces with the software and the in-dome calibration system in the off-sky, sorry. So the goal here to make sure that we have a calibration product pipeline verified as well. And I want to check. And then the on-sky engineering activities, so similar to ComCam, we're going to do a lot of optical alignment, pointing testing, active optic optimization, wavefront sensor calibration, and I'm going to touch on that, and then initial science verification. So for this is kind of a graph. I left it here. I didn't know if I wanted to present it, but I left it to show you a little bit better visually what I meant by having donuts. And the point I wanted to make on this slide is the fact that on top of that optimization of the open loop model, what we really care about, what you care about, is the science performance and the PSF on the science detector. So we're going to spend a lot of time also calibrating what the wavefront sensor is telling us with what we really want on the detector. So at the end of the on-sky engineering phase, we're going to have a good understanding of our system, both hardware, software, but also observatory operation. And the goal, again, is to really focus on science. So we want to have science-ready data product, not just images, but also data. And to reinforce what I said for ComCam, we would have exercised the pipeline from the beginning. It's not just at this point that we say we'll turn the pipeline on. We would have pushed the data through the science pipeline and produced catalogs and diagnostic metrics and plot from the beginning. So this is something that we would have exercised routinely to be very efficient as soon as we reach first light. And so what we define as a system first light is when the observatory is delivering, again, science grade images and data quality over the full field of view. And the last step, so from the system first light to what we call the operation readiness review, we would have 2 phases. One, which is the system optimization. So we're going to have to tune the system, but also the scheduler. We're going to make sure we're efficient in our observing, and we have the science performance over a different range of conditions, seeing conditions, weather, and others. And at that time, we're going to be ready for science validation surveys. So at the bottom of that little table on the right, you see what we need also from the data management side to make sure that we have the ISR verify on sky images, and we have the right PSF modeling and astrometric and photometric calibration. And then we're ready to go into science validation surveys. This is a little over 30 days of observing sequences. And we have 2 different validation surveys. One that will create and exercise templates that will then be used by the second survey to ensure that at least that portion of the pipeline is also working. And we're going to make sure that our scheduler, again, is doing the right thing, and we're validating our science. Okay. Of course, there are safety procedures that we need to keep in mind. I don't talk about it a lot, but we also are making sure that we have all of our safety procedure in place to run the observatory. Just a couple of words on that particular science verification aspect. we are putting a lot of emphasis right now to prepare for, again, metrics and diagnostic tools. This is something that the full team led by Keith is really pushing, so then we actually understand how to evaluate our system. And we're starting with the auxiliary telescope, and by that time we would have a suite of tools that help us with the system, with the actual hardware, but also with the science. And this same suite of tools is going to be used, again, to monitor the science pipeline. And so that has been, again, our emphasis over the last year. We have been integrating those metrics and plots, and we have used the Gen 3 middleware capabilities to help us with efficiency as well. So this is something that is still ongoing, but we're making lots of progress. And then our final review will be the construction completeness and operation readiness. And this is really a set of artifacts going from documentation to science requirement verification, system verification. And this is a document that we will hand to Bob at the end of construction, beginning of operation, to make sure that we're all on the same page on what we are giving him and what kind of keys we're giving him. And here is just a subset of what might interest you among those deliverables, sorry. So verification of system requirements, both at the LSR and OSS level, science requirements and system requirements level. We will have documentation. Again, documentation is important and we take it seriously. It's not the easiest, but we are making sure that we have our software documented and our hardware maintenance documented. We also will go through a few studies, and here is 4 of them that were highlighted by Keith. A few studies to inform LSST operation on how to use the system. So one of them, for example, is, do we use 2 times 15-second or 1 time 30-second exposure? Do we have the understanding of how many visits do we want and the quality of this visit to do template generation? How do we correlate the environment, so the seeing inside the dome or the temperature, to the image quality and data quality that we have at the end? So things like that are still questions at this point and will hopefully be answered, if not fully, but partially by the end of construction. And we are also working on a series of construction paper. All right, I have one more topic to go through. It's the in-kind. I know Bob has talked about them yesterday already. What I wanted to highlight here is that even though we have 2 types of in-kinds, we have the first one, which are US and Chilean, really focused on commissioning. We also have the international in-kind, and part of the international in-kinds, we have a few that are focused on commissioning activities and more technical activities already. And we're really considering those 2 as the same, and we're combining those resources and we're integrating those resources within our planning meetings and all that, to make sure that we're actually building an observatory that's going to deliver the science we all want. So I think I already said that the goal is to really integrate the expertise from the community to get the best out of Rubin. And it's always good to get the experience and a new look at some of the things that we're doing to help, again, getting the best out of it. I think the rest already has been discussed. So there is a link here to the onboarding process and status and initial work assignment if you're interested. And one thing I'm going to touch on, and I'm going to direct all the questions to Robert, if there are any, is how we're trying right now to organize all this effort, because it's a huge community. It's very useful to get input from the community, but how do we make sure that we, Rubin project, deliver the completeness deliverables that I just mentioned, and mainly the system level requirements and the science requirements that we need to deliver. So Keith Bechtel is the author behind it, and he's been developing science units to really try and map out the experts, the expertise from the community to some of those requirements. And he really focused on data analysis expertise, on how to plan for the observations, and on potential issues and concerns that might come out of using the system as a whole. So he's been looking at, again, mapping all those expertise on requirements involving system engineering as well, because that's the group that will be responsible for the requirements. And then also he's been putting 1 or 2 leads, Rubin staff, to provide the scientific leadership. So there's, so that's work in progress. I will put in a chat, because I didn't put it in a presentation, but I will put it in a chat, a link to some of the resources that might interest you. And also here in the presentation, there's the range of science verification and validation studies that he's already looked at and mapped out to some of the verification. All right, and again, the goal is to make sure that we really begin strongly with a 10-year survey, and we're actually getting what we need at the end. Perfect. So this is really my conclusion. I'm going to leave you with that nice picture, because again, I'm from a technical background, so this is what inspires me. And I think it's a great achievement to have now ComCam on our mounts and ready to integrate the optics and then be on Sky to do engineering first light in a year from now. But again, we actually are working on making sure the rest of it and the data quality is following the same progress, really using the auxiliary telescope to do that precursor data, and focusing on also putting the infrastructure in place to do system and science verification and validation. And my last bullet is important as well. I haven't talked a lot about it, but safety is very important to us, both for the components, but also for the people, and for the people both on a physical side, but also on a mental side. So we really want to make sure that we're all paying attention to how we use resources, and I'm going to leave that with you. I'm really looking forward to collaborating with all of you on making this observatory a success. So thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, there are questions for Sandrine. Thank you so much for your talk. Very instructive. Are there any questions? Okay.
With the Gemini and SWORD that will be redirected to do follow-up of LSST, what's the status? Is there any consideration for sharing the framework of telemetry and data quality from the auxiliary telescopes with the other telescopes on the mountain? How mature is this plan, if any?
Right. So I am. So far, we are sharing telemetry of the environmental instruments, so DIM and weather. So we have the plan to share that. I am not aware of a plan to share auxiliary telescope data, and I'm looking at Jelko and Bob, but that's not something that we have discussed yet. No, with SO and Gemini, yeah. I mean, of course we are, okay. Yeah, so I think what Jelko wants to say, and maybe you can, but is that we are definitely using input of the auxiliary telescope to the Simony telescope, the main survey, right? And we are also, the scheduler is taking into account the position of the main telescope to to have the auxiliary telescope follow the main telescope. So we're always going to look around the same region to make sure that we're probing the same atmosphere, but not with SOAR and Gemini.
I'm Meg Schwam from Queen's University Belfast. I guess this is partially a comment / question, but the question bit is, this is all great. And having worked at an observatory, I know that there's a balance between what's actually going on and what you tell the community, because you're debugging problems that you know you can fix, right? And so you don't want to say this isn't working because you're dealing with it and you're solving the issue. But on the other hand, you have to keep the community updated. And what I haven't seen in the plan yet is, what is the communications plan going to be to tell the community where you're at in commissioning? Will there be a blog? Is there going to be like a graphic like JWST? Because I think there's going to be a lot of interest, and I worry we'll start bothering people to try to find out. And so I was wondering if you can talk about what's the commissioning communication plan and how has that been developed, or is that been developed yet?
So the part that I can answer to beyond those milestones that you've seen, I mean, schedule wise, you're going to see what slips. And then also Željko mentioned yesterday, some of the issues that we've been having with the refrigeration system. So maybe this talks at PCW or this venue is one way. Now, if you want to go a little bit more technical, my answer might not satisfy you, but a more specific point. So like let's say I'm going to talk about the active optic system because that's what I'm working on. If we do have an issue with the active optic system, the group that is helping us, or the part of the community that are affected by or not affected by, integrated with it, will know really quickly what's going on. Then there's going to be an impact on the schedule, and that's what's going to be communicated to the community. Again, I don't think it's a fully satisfying answer, but that's my my first comment.
I just want to add some recent activities regarding Meg's question. So just like everyone else, we were deeply impressed by what JWST did during their commissioning period and the impact on everyone around the world. So we are setting up a number of working groups that will include both our project personnel as well as some of the people who are behind that great JWST success, because we are the same family or a family, so we'll draw on their experience. And we will also draw on suggestions from our science collaborations, for example, for what could be the most impressive first light image for Rubin, where we don't have resolution of JWST, but we have this giant field of view, and perhaps we can explore the time axis. So we are working on this. We are just about to set up these working groups, and maybe next year at LSST in Europe, we'll have something more to show for it. Thanks, Meg. Good question.
I do have a question, because since I don't see anyone around raising their hands, concerning maybe a joining point between what Jack was saying and what you were saying, is that maybe also this science unit can help in exploiting very well the commissioning data. And I'm very appreciating that you are opening also for the in-kind for scientists that can contribute. So that was a comment for me. Very hard to hear. Sorry. Okay, sorry. I mean, I was saying that since these science unit are going to be to host also people from in-kind, I'm sure that in this kind of unit may also serve for the commissioning to exploit very well the data that are coming from the commissioning. So to push up the science we can do with LSST. And I was very pleased that also in-kind the people were invited to join. I don't know how do you, for example, do you expect to make this kind of selection or invitation?
So yes, so that's, I mean, you can answer if you want, but and you can complete. Like Keith is really working on how to do the communication, and I lost my thought. And go for it.
So we're setting these groups up, and I think there are 12 or 14. Sandrine gave the list. They'll reappear in my talk on how we're using Oxtel to get the commissioning jump started, which is a way to think about the session I'm going to be running later. So as Sandrine said, they've got leads mostly from the project. That's so that people from in-kind don't have to spend their time worrying about schedule and who you report to and how you get work out of the project, which is complicated because we have to negotiate that internally. So you can think of these science units as being the points of contact between the commissioning teams and the project itself, and going in both directions. So Keith and I want to get feedback saying the data you're taking doesn't let me answer my questions, or your reductions are not working, or we should take this data set so we can explore this aspect of the commissioning data. And then what's an example? Low surface brightness science, which isn't one of our core requirements. But we identified that because it really drives the system. You learn an awful lot about the system by trying to do low surface brightness science. So we're expecting to ask those people to come back and say, we're seeing these problems in the camera, or we're seeing these problems. We'll then process that and go to say, ask somebody else, for example. Well, maybe that's in the calibration or in the instrument signature removal. So the person on the science team responsible for the camera ISR would then get together with the low surface brightness people, and we would say, come back in a fortnight and tell us what you've learned. So it's a way to integrate all the community experience, those people who have signed up for commissioning work, in a way that we think we can manage as a very busy project.
I can't believe it's a very busy project. There are any other questions? If not, we go to Zoom or Slack to check if there are other questions.
While you're looking, I also wanted to remind people of the LSST community, which is also nice for feedback and interaction between projects and the community. If you have any question on the pipeline and others, really, even the system.
Okay. No questions on Slack, yes, but perhaps I wanna amplify this discussion, right? So the community that we address, that we reach, that is part of our organization on the science side with Rubin is very diverse.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of resources are very diverse, and some parts of the community have been linked to Rubin for a very long time. They have many points of contact, others are not. So I don't really have a question because I don't want to ask you how you're going to do that. But so are you concerned that you might get a lot of feedback from some science areas and not enough from others, such that Rubin eventually doesn't become the comprehensive survey that we all want it to be?
So I'm going to work with my project scientist and deputy project scientist to make sure that we are getting feedback from all the collaboration, really. And I think you're correct. We need to keep an eye on what science collaboration or what science cases we're getting a lot of feedback from, and encourage others to chime in. No, I agree. And so I think we need to work closely together to make sure that doesn't happen.
Are there any other questions? I do have another question, sorry. I thank you for, can you hear me? Okay, I thank you for saying that also there is the needs of the definition of the visit concerning the time, no? Because this is something that may affect observation and some scientific target, for example, concerning the saturation. So it's important to know. Do you know when do you think this will be addressed, this kind of definition?
So the definition we need to have on Sky data, and we need to have feedback. So I don't know if Steve has another answer to that, but it's definitely not now. And that's what I'm saying. It's going to be most likely at the end of construction.
Ah, okay, okay.
Do you have anything to add, Steve? Or yeah, no.
Okay, I think that if we are fine with questions, I thank you, Sandrine, again. Thank you so much.